Our God, we ask that in these minutes you might open up our minds and our memories as we sift and consider where we've come from and where we might be going. Amen. I've mentioned before from this pulpit that I grew up in Sacramento, just a half dozen miles from Sutter's Fort. Anybody been there? A few of you. That was the destination for many pioneers of California, who made the long trek from St. Joseph, Missouri to the Central Valley of California. Two of my great-grandfathers, in fact, came west in covered wagons. So the story of Gold Rush pioneers is in my blood. As a small child, I read about other pioneers who were not as lucky as my ancestors. The most famous among those, of course, were members of the Donner Reed Party and the tragedy of how they took an ill-advised shortcut. In fact, the first bit of history that I remember learning, I was about 9, was about a little 8-year-old girl named Patty Reed, who came west with her family in that ill-fated company. And when their wagons failed them on the Bonneville salt flats, which is the reason the short cutoff was not a good idea, they abandoned their wagons there, and Mr. Reed ordered his family to leave behind everything they owned in the wagons. Well, Patty was a very independent spirit at 8 years old, and so she crawled into the back of their wagon and rescued two things she felt deeply connected to: a lock of her grandmother's hair and a tiny wooden doll with cotton clothing. These two things she stuffed into the only pocket she had in the only dress she wore. Well, once the family stopped at what is now today Donner Park, a little west of Donner Lake, her mother and father left Patty with people they trusted and went on to Sacramento without her, thinking that that was the quickest way to get help and bring food back to the weaker members of the party. The height of the snow there that winter was over 20 feet. Well, the story of the parting of Patty and her mother is a remarkable one. Like Jesus at 12, Patty was precocious, mature beyond her years. You might call her an old soul. She had a maturity that made her stoical instead of desperate, as most people, regardless of age, would be under those circumstances. By her own account, she accepted her parents' decision, knowing she'd probably never see her mother again, that one of them would likely die. It's so amazing what our children are capable of when push comes to shove, It gives me shivers thinking of what Patty's mother must have felt leaving her behind, thinking it was the best chance they had of saving all of them, pondering her daughter's stoic gesture as she walked west away from her. Patty's parents made it to the fort, but it took much longer than they hoped for her father to get back to her. So many in Patty's group had died in the meantime, but Patty survived. Once her father had fetched her and they'd made it over the crest of the Sierras and were in reach of the valley, they rested, and it was then, according to her own written account, that sitting beside a campfire, Patty took the doll out of her pocket and told it the whole story of everything that she had seen and experienced in her parents' absence. Tell you, the image of that brave little girl talking to her doll just captured my imagination when I was 9 years old, and it has touched my heart ever since. That story has been on my mind as I've thought about the long trek that Jesus and his parents took to and from Jerusalem when he was 12 years old, how they too were separated, along the way. Before I get to that, let me share with you a little bit of how, this is tangential, but it figures in, how I ended up leaving Portland years ago and going to Utah for a 10-year ministry. Back in 2010, a friend emailed me about a church in Salt Lake City that she was serving in that time as the interim. It was looking for a permanent pastor, of course, and so she included the mission statement of the church in her email. And here it is. It said, "We are God's children, seeking to know God and God's will for our renewal and healing. Celebrating and reflecting Christ's love, Wasatch Presbyterian Church invites all people with special concern for the young to grow in faith within a nurturing community through worship, learning, and service to others." Well, that part about special concern for the young spurred me to apply. And looking back, I remember that every church I have served could have had that in their mission statement, including this one. Southminster has always been about children, and that special concern is, as if you've noticed in this last year, still growing. We care for them now, and we want very much to pass on to them a world they'd want to live and prosper in, right? As parents, as grandparents, extended family, teachers, guardians, friends of children, we all are concerned for their well-being. We are meant to protect and teach them, right? Nurture and nourish their lives. It is our responsibility to ensure their health and safety because, growing up is hard work and full of risk. 6 or 7 years ago, when I heard that over 600 children had been separated by orders of our then president, separated from their parents at our southern border, likely to never see them again, like Patty Reed, I was more than anguished. I was sick to death and appalled. Like most of you, I cannot bear the extreme suffering of innocent ones, especially small children. I figured that was the worst thing that could have happened until maybe the recent news from Israel and Gaza. What sickness rages in the heart of any human being, adult human being, I mean, who would support those policies or execute them? Well, before we all lose perspective, let me note that Nicholas Kristof wrote a piece for the New York Times that was published yesterday called 2023 was a terrible year and also maybe the best one yet for humanity. What was good about it? Child mortality rates are still going down, and that is not happening by accident, but through the good work of many, many wise and caring human beings. So back to this morning's text. The focus, as I've said, is on the adolescent 12-year-old Jesus. Think sixth grader, right? Bring to your mind your sixth grade self for a moment. What were you up to then? I mean, in your heart. If you were like me, you were beginning to imagine what you might do with your life, right? Jesus had clearly begun to explore his own identity, his possible future, what his heart was about at bottom. In his staying behind in the temple and surrounding himself with the teachers there, Jesus was coming to understand his heritage and his relationship with God. Growing up means, establishing our identity, figuring out our proper place in this world. And of course, along the way, we make mistakes. We get lost, we backtrack, and sometimes we just need to start over. But ultimately, growing up means moving out, right? Finding a new home. Sometimes this involves a geographical move, but always it involves psychological and spiritual moves as well. It's no surprise that Mary would be in a panic when she discovers that Jesus was not with a group of travelers heading home. With great anxiety, she and Joseph search for him. 3 days later, the one who was lost has been found. Mary's first words are, "Child, why have you treated us like this?" In the context of the gospel story of Jesus, what I really hear is, "Where have you been, young man? Your father and I did not survive angel visits, birth in a stable, and living like refugees in Egypt, only to have you get lost in the big city. But as the story goes, Jesus isn't the one who gets lost by himself, that is. He knows who he is and where he belongs. Mary and Joseph are the ones who, ironically, seem lost. This is a story about growing up, but it is not just Jesus's growing up, you know. It is also Mary and Joseph's. It's about you and me growing up, too. And look, growing up, of course, is not about how old we are, right? It is really about moving into deeper and more authentic relationships with our world, with one another, with ourselves, and our Creator. Like all children, Jesus will play a huge part and a crucial step in the maturing of his parents. And this is not just because he's Jesus. No, all children play a huge part in the maturing of their parents, no matter who they are and what they are like. I know this from experience, and now it's fascinating, you know, to watch my grandchildren shape my daughter's maturing. I'm watching as my daughter is looking forward in wonderment at what kind of adults her girls will one day be like. They're 4 and 6 years old right now. I'm also observing how my daughter is looking back at the parenting she received from me and her mother, weighing it, wondering over it, asking me questions about it from time to time, which is exactly as it should be. And it gives one a sense of how important it is that most of us live as long as we do, right? Our full maturing takes a long time, a couple of generations. It's remarkable how our children challenge us to look at our world and our lives and our parents and ourselves in new and often painful ways, right? That's exactly what Jesus' question to Mary does. She had put herself and Joseph at the center of Jesus' world. His question to them were about to undo that when he says, you know, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I must be in God's house? Jesus is telling Mary she should have known where he was. It's as if he's saying, knowing what you know about me already, where else would I be? Just the kind of thing a precocious 6th grader might say. Jesus is telling her what is at the center of his world, and in a sense asks Mary to do the same. By asking his parents to look at him differently means that Mary and Joseph will have to begin letting go of their little boy, Jesus. Jesus was born of Mary, but like all children, he doesn't belong to his parents. They can give him love and safety and a roof and their concern, but that's about it. He is engaged in what we all are engaged in the end, our Creator's business. That is to say, we were all living out of the larger purposes put within us when we were born. Ultimately, as parents must strive to be more like him and not make him more like them. And you can judge any parental relationship that way. Jesus has moved from Mary and Joseph's home to what comes next. This is not a rejection by any means of his earthly parents, but a natural progression. It's what Jesus will eventually ask of his own disciples too, Simon and Andrew, James and John, when he says, "Follow me." That will be the invitation for them to leave their homes, their nets, their parents, and move to a different place, live a different life, see the world with different eyes. It's what we all are asked to do at different stages in our lives. So, can we agree that growing up involves leaving our comfort zone, letting go of what is safe and familiar, and moving to a more spacious place, to the God place in our hearts, whether we know what's happening in us or not? Truth is, some of us come from very troubled homes. Homes of fear, anger, prejudice, homes of grief and sorrow, homes in which we have been told or have maybe become convinced that we don't matter, that we are not good enough, that we are maybe unlovable. Homes in which we have been or continue to be hurt or wounded. Every one of us could name the different homes in which we have lived, right? Homes that keep our lives small, our visions narrow maybe, our world sometimes empty. The problem is compounded by the fact that even in such places, we can become comfortable. But look, they are not our true homes. They are not the home God offers us. We may have to pass through them, but there is a meter running on them all. We aren't meant to stay in any of them forever, however good or bad they were. So, what are the little homes in which you live or have lived before? How have they bounded your life? Sometimes stifled your growth, kept you from maturing? What have you left behind or might have still to leave behind in order to grow up and move to a place that really fits you, who you really are? Those can be really hard questions, painful questions, right? Ultimately, however, they are questions that I think are founded on love. Because look, Mary asked, "Child, why have you treated us like this?" That's one huge question that at some point every parent asks of his or her child, right? Most important answer, however, will not be given by the child. It will be given by the parent who can turn that question, "Child, why have you treated us this way?" back on himself.